We will have the conversations that few are prepared to have, and more importantly, conversations centered on rationality. Subscribe now to listen to Rational Voices with Sunil. Jackson, it's amazing to have you on the podcast today. For the listeners who are unaware of who you are, it'd be great to get a brief bio in terms of your career and some of the amazing stuff that you've done.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on. And just a little background on me. I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma, born and raised. I went to Oral Roberts University, where I did my undergrad and my master's degrees in theology. I've been pastoring Sheridan Church for the last 8 years and having the time of my life. We have a campus in Tulsa and one also in Oklahoma City, but have been also politically engaged. I was the lead for Pastors for Trump during the 2024 campaign, which was a coalition of over 10,000 pastors in all 50 states mobilizing the evangelical voting bloc, and they turned out in mass, and 9 out of 10 evangelicals voted for President Trump. So that was a major win. And now I work with the White House Faith Office, the National Faith Advisory Board, and so just having a lot of fun. I've got an incredible family. My wife, Kendra, we have 5 kids from the ages of 5 to 15. So we're busy, having fun, pastoring a church, trying to help save America, and raising kids at the same time. And so it's just, life's been good, God's been good, and I've enjoyed it. It hasn't always been easy, but I've enjoyed it.
I mean, going into talking about the election with President Trump, or maybe just more generally, not even just the presidency, what is it with regards to President Trump that made you set up the group to set up the Pastors for Trump? I know, for example, we can see a lot from the Democratic Party. They almost have gone completely against a lot of just general religious views, Christian views. But what was it in particular about President Trump and his team that made you feel comfortable and confident to set that group up?
Well, we've never had a more pro-Christian, pro-faith president, at least in my lifetime, than Donald Trump. And, there's just many things we could point to, just from appointing Supreme Court justices that overturned Roe v. Wade and sent it back to the states, which was something I don't think any of us really thought was ever going to happen. Although we fought for it, but I don't think we actually thought we would win that. And that was thanks to President Trump. President Trump's been very clear on the gender issue, which is a staple point when it comes to biblical Christianity, that God created them male and female. There's not 97 different options that you get to choose from. And President Trump has been very strong on that issue as well. And then just, he surrounds himself with Christians and pastors like myself. And so, I've become very close to Don and to Eric Trump, and so getting to know them very, very well. It was just one of those things when you look at President Trump and then you look at his opponent, whether that was Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, or Kamala Harris. The decision was easy. It wasn't one you had to really think about in regards to which one of these candidates most aligns with my values as a Christian. And so, President Trump, the thing I love about him is he's not one of those politicians that promises you the world and then delivers on nothing at all. He's one of those guys that he tells you exactly what he thinks. You don't ever have to question, I wonder what he really believes. He just kind of tells you exactly what he believes. And then when he makes a promise, he sees it through. And so me, as just, an ordinary American, I appreciate that. I appreciate the authenticity, the honesty, even if sometimes maybe he's too honest. Maybe sometimes he's too honest. But I appreciate that. And I think a lot of other pastors and Christians do as well.
Definitely, and you mentioned his 2 children there, and I think one of the things that one of my favorite things about President Trump, which I don't think gets talked about enough, is how what an amazing job he's done with his children. To have all of his children by his side on whenever he's campaigning, whenever he's doing all these events, considering the ages, considering everything taken into account. I think it's amazing that him as a father, he can have his children around him, and you can see all of them are strong, competent people, regardless of what people may think or not. They're all high functioning, all very successful in their own right. And I think that's something that he doesn't necessarily get a lot of enough credit for in terms of how much of an
Yeah.
amazing job he's done raising his children. Is that something that you've seen?
Oh yeah, I mean, Don and Eric will tell stories how every day growing up, like they say every day, before the day began, President Trump would tell all of them, no drugs, no alcohol, no cigarettes. And he would repeat those three things every single day to his kids, and he made them work. A lot of people don't know this. But I just did an interview yesterday with Eric Trump, and Eric tells stories how when he was 11 years old, his dad made him go onto the construction sites, and he was working at the age of 11 on these construction sites because his dad wanted him to understand every aspect of the business and the organization. And so they're a hardworking family. They were not, say spoiled rotten because their dad was a, New York billionaire or anything like that. And so um, people overlook that aspect of him because they focus on the things that are juicy. But he was a tremendous father. I mean, the results are there. The fruit is there. His kids turned out not just to be decent, but his kids turned out to be pretty quite amazing.
Definitely. I mean, it's amazing to see, all of them and how successful they've all become. And there's even talk about how intelligent and smart the youngest Baron is. So it's
Yes.
clearly something that he's done incredibly well. I want to stick to the theme of children and marriage because it is a problem, I think, that's occurring also in the UK and generally in the West, and the declining amount of people, one, getting married, and second, having children. Um, how's that panning out in America, and why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, we're in the kind of the same boat that those in Europe are in. Our birth rates are drastically too low, and we are not at a sustainable rate. And it's one of those things that has kind of been the agenda of those, whatever you want to label them, globalist, deep state, whatever term you want to use, is a more of a depopulation agenda that the earth is overcrowded and all that kind of stuff. And so Western civilization is fading into the history of civilization because we are not having children. And part of it is because there's a couple reasons. One, people aren't getting married the way that they previously did. Two, if they are getting married, the economy is not supportive of a family because both the husband and the wife have to work. Childcare is so expensive that if you want to have a child, you can't afford it. So there's a lot of things that are culturally set up against having large families. And so that's a problem. And President Trump has incentivized here in America having children. That there are higher tax breaks than what there were before. There are incentives now under President Trump to have babies because you have to have a generation to pass the baton to. If you don't have a generation to pass the baton to, you're in trouble. So this is a major issue. I mean, you see people bring it up that aren't even really religious people, like Elon Musk. He's not a Christian, he's not religious at all, but he points to this as a huge problem in the West. And so it is something that obviously we have to encourage getting married and having children, which is like the most beautiful thing anybody can do in the first place is starting a family and raising a family. And so families should be celebrated. uh, Children are a blessing, they're not a burden, but they've been made out to be as a burden
So
within our society. And we're like the only society in the history of the world that has ever seen children as a burden rather than a blessing. It was in all ancient civilizations, the more babies you could produce was a sign that the god or the gods looked down upon you with favor and blessing because you were able to be fruitful and multiplying. And so we've got a insidious trend within our culture that hopefully, will be reversed so that the West can survive.
I want to get your take on exactly what you said there in terms of the economy versus the sort of cultural shift of less marriage and less kids. I often have this conversation with my wife, and we always on the same pages. It's like no matter what we do in each other's career, when we do have children, that will be the greatest thing. Period. Giving birth to human life is incredible, and there's nothing that comes close. No matter what I achieve, she
Yeah,
achieves. But from what I've seen culturally, that doesn't quite seem to be the case. I've seen so many people have heard so many stories of how people will say, that they had this job, but now they're a mum. They almost say it in almost a negative way, similar to what you're
right.
saying, burden. Um, how much do you think is the culture, and how much do you think it is the economic side of things? Because you made a really good point in terms of it is more difficult now to have, a parent at home or a mother at home. It tends to be two parents working, in the thing. So what do you take it as? Where do you see the dynamic?
Well, I think a lot of this traces its roots back to feminism, that being a stay-at-home mom was deemed to be like less than. And so the lie that has been sold to many women in the West is that the most valuable thing you can do is have a career. When in reality, the most important thing any woman can do is to raise children. I mean, the bearing of the responsibility of raising the next generation is staggering, how important and vital the role of a mom is. And so the radical feminist movement had really just sold the lie of that having children and raising children was less than going out into the career field and working. And listen, my wife has her own career, and so many women do, and they're able to do both. But my wife, if you were to ask her, the most important thing she does is not her career, but the most important thing she does is raising our 5 kids, because that's just like she understands that. And so, big lie culturally from feminism. And then obviously the economic situation is yes, both parents tend to have to work to make ends meet. And then if you try to add the expense of childcare, which is unbelievably expensive, if you try to add the expense of childcare to your already monthly bills, you're spending more than what you bring in. And so you find yourself, well, we can't have more children, or we can't have any children because we literally cannot afford to send them to daycare or whatever it is. So it's kind of a twofold thing. There's the lie in the culture that being a mom, stay-at-home mom, is like a less than role within society, when it's probably one of the greatest roles in society. But then there's the economic side. Both have to work, and if both do work, then it requires childcare. And then childcare is very expensive. So, yeah, it's kind of like the cards are stacked up against having families right now in the West.
And I think, one of, we had somebody who may know, we had the president of Turning Point USA, Bryce Eddy, on our show yesterday, and he discussed in particular some of the similar stuff that you're saying here. And I think what makes in some for me, what makes the Charlie Kirk death so horrible is the impact of a young man who is doing exactly what you're saying and what I agree with in terms of got married, had kids at a very young age. He's 31, 2 children, and you just think what an regardless of opinions for a second, just as a person, he was going out there preaching about marriage, preaching about having children, and you look at him, how much respect he has as a both husband and father, and I think that what makes in some ways that they're so awful is that environment. I mean, are there other Charlie Kirks that exist in the United States of America? Because we don't see many in the UK, if we're being honest, but in America, is it slightly different?
There are a few. I mean, there is only one Charlie Kirk. I knew Charlie very well, actually. And so people say, we'll find a replacement for Charlie. No, you're not going to find a replacement for Charlie. But other people will have to step up and carry the baton in their own way. And so there are, unfortunately, it's not many, there's not many young men that are able to connect with other young men about the importance of family and about the importance of being a man, rather than being, you can be a male, but that doesn't mean you're a man. There are boys and then there are men, and both are males biologically, but there's a vast difference between boyhood and manhood. And so Charlie was challenging a generation to grow out of boyhood and to enter into manhood, and he was very effective at doing that. And that's why it's such a great loss in America, but I'd also say around the world. I don't think Charlie's impact was limited to college campuses in the United States of America, although he was very effective at that. I mean, I saw, wasn't it like 1 million people in London were marching for Charlie? If I see that right, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but just incredible impact. And so now the responsibility is on other leaders that are, say, younger in nature to step up and to carry, you pick up that bloodstained microphone and to continue forward with the message that Charlie was preaching. You know, he was really proclaiming a message that was life transforming. And so we cannot cower down, because if we cower down, then evil wins. So we have to continue to push forward.
Think what's been what's been beautiful in America from what I've seen, and you're right in saying the UK had a march on Saturday called the Unite the Kingdom, and there was great so many tributes to Charlie Kirk. And what I've really been really proud of fellow conservatives across both in the UK and US is the reaction to the deaf, in terms of I've seen so many people just praying, mourning, and just in huddles, no violence, no
Yeah.
screaming, nothing. And it's been such an amazing thing to watch from far across, to seeing the reaction, because you can just I can just imagine that there's so many people that are almost hoping for the more conservative profile of people to really react and to do some violence and stuff. But from what I've seen, please, correct me if I'm wrong. From what I've seen none of that in the US, and it seems to have been really peaceful and really moving, if anything.
Well, it's a vast difference between 2020 when George Floyd died, and something like 1,400 cities burned in that summer in the United States alone. You know, with Charlie Kirk, you got zero deaths resulting from riots, zero cities burning. That is why I said we are not the same. Those who are
Yeah.
on the right and those who are on the left, we are not the same at all. And that's why I have a hard time with this call for unity. You
Mm.
cannot unify with wickedness and evil. That's the thing. We can unify together, but we cannot unify. Those are two irreconcilably different value systems. When your value system is to burn cities, riot, and kill people in response to an incident, your value system is much different than mine. Mine is not to riot. Mine is not to burn cities. Mine's to pray and to seek change. And that's what we see with the conservatives. So we're not the same. And that's not to say that, oh, we're so much better than them. But in reality, in this regard, we are. We are better than them in this regard, because not a single store had to board up their windows in concern that supporters of Charlie Kirk were going to come and steal the TVs out of the store. There's just a
Yeah.
vast difference between the value system. That's what it is. It's a value system, and they're irreconcilable. There cannot be unity between two irreconcilable value systems. One will win, one will lose. And hopefully, our value system will see the day. Our value system will carry forward, because I hope that people see the difference. I hope they see the difference and they say, okay, one value system is better than the other. And they choose to adopt the value system that we have, because I really do believe it is so much better than burning cities,
Definitely.
rioting and stealing and just all, I mean, you saw the stuff that happened in America in 2020. It was just
Well,
crazy.
you say just America, but what was absolutely absurd and even crazier is it happened in the UK. So the UK
It's like,
protests and riots, and the same sort of far left in the UK is somehow something that happened in America. And it's worth noting this, regardless of what we think of the incident or not, this was a criminal who
sure.
died. So George, somebody put a gun to a pregnant lady's baby, to her belly. I mean, this is a criminal, and
Right.
somehow translated to the UK, and it was scary because I think exactly what you said, and that there is such a stark difference in terms of how the right have reacted compared to left. And
Yeah,
of course, there are some bad apples on both sides, but there is
of
a
course.
stark difference in terms of what we believe in our principles and in our values. And I think what's for me worrying, and this is, obviously the death is horrible, but what's really, really worrying for me is the reaction in UK, in USA, where there have been millions of people celebrating the death of this man because they didn't agree with his views or opinions. That to me is, there's always been civil leaders and inspiring political figures who have passed away, have been shot, have been killed. But what's really I'm finding really disturbing and sick at the moment is the amount of people that are still celebrating his death, that are
Yeah.
still showing no remorse. And I think that really does worry me.
Well, it should. And I mean, to your point, George Floyd was a menace to society. He was
Yeah.
not someone who added value to the society here in the United States. He was a criminal, like plain and simple. I'm not saying that just because he's a criminal, he should die. That's not what I'm saying. However, he's no hero. He is no man worth aspiring to be like. Charlie Kirk, on the other hand, is a hero, someone that people should aspire to be like. Great family man, first and foremost, a follower of Jesus Christ, somebody who had dialogue, was able to interact with people who did disagree with him, but in a way that he was nonviolent, right? And so there is a vast difference. Like that's what I'm like. I see all these politicians who are Republicans and they're calling for unity across the aisle. And the problem is if there's unity across the aisle, that means we have to compromise because our value system is different than their value system. They're irreconcilable. They cannot go together. And so when you're calling for unity, either they have to come up or we have to go down. And I know what this means. We go down. That's what it means because listen, it is a trend and it's a one-way street primarily when it comes to violence and anarchy in regards to who's doing it. It is not Republican conservatives. Are there some bad apples on the right? Of course. There are people on our team that are downright crazy, absolutely crazy. But that is a super, super small fraction of the right. The left, however, it is a major fraction of the left. That's why I say it's just two differing value systems, and it's not political per se. It's just the value system is so different that there is no way to just simply let's unite together. We have very different values.
Has America, like, is it like just universal and accepted that the United States of America have a far left problem? I was looking at the most recent shootings. They've all come from people belonging to the left. I've seen some of the massacres, the attacks, assassination plots, all that sort of stuff. There seems to me on there's quite clear evidence and quite clear facts that it's people largely on the left, a lot of them linked with the trans ideology, either
Oh
being
yeah.
trans or being massive supporters of trans. And I think, is this being looked at? Are people in America saying, okay, forget about man is a man, woman is a woman. How about the fact that this is actually now becoming a bit of a security threat? Is that something being looked at?
Well, it's being talked about, say, on the right side of the political spectrum, because, it's just one of those things. It's like, how many times does this particular thing have to happen until you see a trend in the making? And so here's what I can say about the transgender movement. It's been a movement of death. If you look at the suicide rates among those who identify as transgender, it's unbelievably and sadly high. Not only that, the most recent mass shootings for the last like 5 years have been primarily, not all, but most, have been transgender individuals or supporters, radical supporters of the transgender movement, like the guy that shot Charlie Kirk. his boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever was transitioning into being a transgender. And so, yeah, this is like, I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to put this together. It's like trans violence is a continuing thing, and we have to address it. But the problem is, if you won't face it, you can't fix it. And so those that are on the left refuse to face the reality that this movement that they have propped up, the transgender movement, they have propped it up, is a movement of death. It's only resulted in death. Those who have been attacked by transgenders, but just as sad, transgender people themselves. Their suicide
Yeah,
rate is so high that anybody with a heart would say, okay, they need help. They
yeah,
are committing suicide at a rate that nobody else in society is. Nobody else in society is killing themselves in the numbers that transgender people are. And so if you have a heart, if you care about people, you would say we should help that demographic. They are suffering from a mental illness. They are miserable, and therefore they're taking other people's lives because hurt people, and they're taking their own lives. And so this is a major problem. But if you won't face it, face the reality that it is a problem, you'll never fix it. You'll never fix it at all.
I'm sure you've had many exchanges with the trans community online, and I'm guessing would be very positive. And from my personal experience, from what I've seen, we've had a lot of people who've talked really strongly about the problems with the trans community on this podcast. There's so Miriam Grossman, who's based in North America, went through the whole history recently. And one of the things I'd be really fascinated to get your take, especially as a pastor and a believer in Christianity, is I look at the trans movement as almost religious like, except without the forgiveness. It just seems to me that this is exactly like how a religious being is, but without the forgiveness. And the worrying thing for me is like how does that transition away into, let's say, either more faith-based people? Do you think, for example, I was having a discussion actually with my wife recently, is a lot of these people maybe 40, 50 years ago may have gone to their local church, if you're in the West, maybe a temple east, wherever, and that would be where you get almost this sense of belonging. Whereas now they seem to get this sense of belonging from a trans community, because I can
Yeah.
imagine initially when you identify as this, you must feel amazing because you'll get all this praise and all this loving us straight off the bat. But as time goes on, um, that ideology does seem for me to get more and more extreme. Do you see the likeness between what goes on in the trans arena to religious cult-like behavior?
Yeah, I mean, it is their religion. I mean, everybody is a theologian. Okay, everybody's a theologian. Everyone has a concept of God, and if you're an atheist, you're still a theologian because you don't believe in God. So you think about God. Everyone is, and so to them, they have built their own religion, and they've made God in their image and in their likeness. And therefore, they have really formed, you could call it a death cult, because it has only produced death and misery for those within the community, but also those outside of the community. And this is why I say, it has to be addressed, and if it's not addressed, it's only going to get worse. It's not going to correct itself. There's not like an autocorrect when it comes to these type of movements. There has to be a forced correction, and unfortunately, it's just been one of those things that we have cheered them on as calling them heroes, and they're not heroes. These are people who need help. They're not people who should be celebrated to, hey, let's aspire for our children to be like this. No, these people need severe help. And it's unfortunate because whenever you don't help them and you cheer them on, all you're doing is hindering them and causing them to be more miserable than what they already are. And so it's just, to me, it's really sad. It's really sad because they're not getting the help. The truth is not being told to them because they're in an echo chamber. They're in an echo chamber with one another, and they validate one another's sense of uh, emotional state, mental state, whatever it may be. And it's just unfortunate because they're not being told the truth that they can be experiencing freedom as opposed to the bondage that they find themselves in. And that's why you see them lash out in violence to others and then against themselves. That's a great indicator. They're not happy. You know, there's, oh, what happened? No, they're not happy. Happy people don't kill other people and kill themselves. That's not what happy people do. That's what miserable people do. They're miserable and they're not being helped.
Has there been any changes since President Trump has come back? Because on the surface, when he got elected, we saw some media outlets change a bit of the language that they were speaking in terms of with men and women in regard. I mean, so much has happened since, and has there been any changes towards the way the average American feels about the trans community? Are there more people preaching what you and I would say, or is it still
Oh,
the
yeah.
same as before?
It's taken off like a rocket ship. Wokeism is wokeism is on life support right now. So it's not officially dead.
Right.
It's still here, but it is on life support. Greatest example of this, and I don't know how much you kind of follow American culture, is Cracker Barrel and the change of the logo. Cracker Barrel is like a staple restaurant here in the United States of America, and they
Okay.
changed their logo from the old country store to a more modern, inclusive logo. And people erupted over it. I mean, just erupted over a logo change. And Cracker Barrel lost over $100 million in one day. In one day. And you know
Oh,
what
wow.
Cracker Barrel did? They reversed the logo and they went
Right.
back to the old fashioned logo rather than the woke logo. And so that's a great indicator. The
Right.
culture has shifted. The culture has shifted because Cracker Barrel caved. 5 years ago, there wouldn't have been the public pressure on Cracker Barrel to cave. Cracker Barrel would have gone through with the change. They wouldn't have lost $100 million in one day.
Yeah.
So there is a cultural shift that we have seen since President Trump took office, and it's good. It's a good thing because we're coming back to more sanity and normal. Just things that we took for granted. I mean, like growing up, you and I, we just took for granted that like I was born a boy, so I'm a boy. Like that was I was never like contemplating, am I am I possibly a woman? You know, that was just not something we wrestled with. It was not a and so like today, you know, our kids they they have to discover themselves, right? And so it's a totally different world, but that is fading away. So I would say, observing culturally, wokeism is still alive, but it is on life support. It is not thriving like it was several years ago.
I mean, so yeah, I suppose what interests me with that is with the Democrats right now. So are we seeing a change within the Democratic Party? Are they moving more towards the center? Is that something we're seeing?
Partly, and the other part more extreme. So you have someone like Gavin Newsom. He's the governor of California. Gavin Newsom wants to be president in 2028. So what does Gavin Newsom do? He brings Charlie Kirk on his podcast. Gavin Newsom comes and he agrees with Charlie Kirk on the men and women's sports issue because Gavin Newsom, although he is not a good human and although he is not an honest person, he's not dumb. He sees the polling. He sees that men competing in women's sports is not popular among Americans. It's just like, I don't want men in the locker room with my daughters. Like, that's just Republican, Democrat, that's just something parents don't want. So you have Gavin Newsom, who has become very center. He recognizes that the woke issues cost the Democrats big time. It costs the Democrats. But then you have other Democrats like Bernie Sanders or AOC who are endorsing Mondami in New York City, who is a socialist, uh, communist, really, for the mayor. So you have like, there's a more extreme, and then you have someone like Gavin Newsom who wants to be president, who's coming to the center because he realizes the American people are not going to elect somebody who supports men competing in women's sports. It's just not going to happen.
Maybe slightly off topic, but talking on Mandami, I mean, everything I read worries me that there's actually, it seems like there's a very good chance he'll be the mayor of New York. Is that
Yeah.
factually a thing, or is that just?
My understanding, obviously, I don't live in New York. I live in Oklahoma. We're like the exact opposite of New York City. I mean, like, it's a totally different world. I mean, we may be a part of the same country, but we are in different universes.
Right.
And everything I see, polling wise, Mondami's going to be the next mayor of New York City, which is just
Crazy.
mind blowing. It's mind blowing, to be honest with you. And so, I mean, I hope that's not the case, right? I hope that's not the case, but it seems like that will be the case. And that goes to show you just how far the left has gone in regards to, because I mean, someone like Mandami, 15 years ago would have never gotten more than 3, 5% of the vote. But now he's going to secure enough to probably become the next mayor of New York City.
It's so scary. I mean, I've just seen some of the videos and even some of the stuff he says openly about, basically not wanting people to own their own homes and all. This is
Right.
deep, deep communism. This isn't even
Yes.
like, he's not even trying to hide it like maybe previous people have. He's just outright saying it, and it worries me that that's going to be the mayor of, the such a big hub that is New York. It's scary.
Yeah. But, but it may be a good thing. Sometimes you need things to go really, really bad to wake people up. And so maybe they elect him and it doesn't turn out the way he promises it'll turn out, because communism never does. It
Yeah,
always promises utopia, and
yeah.
then it ends in total death and destruction. And so maybe it'll be a good thing for the people of New York to experience communism
Mm.
and come to find out we don't like this at all. So maybe there will be a positive out of it if he does become mayor.
What about in terms of your political status? Because I was reading a bit before this podcast, and I've seen that you've run in the past. Is that something that you'd be looking to do again? And how does that work in terms of being a pastor? Do you have to quit that job, or can you do both at the same time? How does it sort of work?
Well, I would never quit being a pastor. People are like, that's a demotion to me to go from a pastor to a politician. That's not a promotion, that's a demotion. I ran, it was a wild story. General Michael Flynn called me and said, I want you to run for this. I'd never intended to run for anything. I'm so glad I did. I learned so much. I met so many great people. It stretched me, it grew me. Will I ever do it again? I mean, you always keep that door open, right? I've learned to never say no because you really don't know. But the right race at the right time, I would do. I've learned so much from the first time I ran. I've met so many more people that know what they're doing. I mean, when you first run for office, you have, especially if that's not your background. My background's pastoring a church. Now I'm having to learn, energy issues, and I'm having to learn education issues. It was a learning curve to come adept to those things. So we'll see. We'll see. I'm not running for anything right now. I'm having way too much fun doing what I'm currently doing, and I don't have to go around begging people for votes or money. And it's a nice state to be.
I mean, with talking of pastures in the US, and you kind of alluded to it at the start. Do any of them belong to the left? Do any of them belong to the Democratic Party? Because from what I can, on basic sort of common sense knowledge, that none of them should be there. Um, so are they all Republicans?
Well, I mean, it just kind of varies. America's diverse, right? And so you just have a diversity. It really is. And, so it's a tough one to answer.
Right, right. I mean, just looking again from the outside, it just seems, I've seen some of the stuff that the Democrats are preaching. I know there are more sort of woke churches and whatever that exist in US and UK, to be fair. But isn't something like going into direct conflict with the faith itself? Is that something that, do they get that criticism?
Well, for me, I can't see how one could be a modern day Democrat. So I'm not talking about Democrats, John F. Kennedy, a
Right.
modern day Democrat and being a Bible believing Christian at the same time. Because remember what I said, these are two irreconcilable value systems. So
Mm,
you can't have the two. You have to choose one or the other. Uh, like the value of a life. I mean, either you are with the Bible that God intentionally created all of life and all of life is valuable and therefore, you know, you support life, or if you're a Democrat, you support the death of life, of innocent life. So the two are just there. The democratic values of the modern day Democratic Party and biblical Christian values, they're just irreconcilable. And I mean, that's just like the bottom line. It's just something you cannot mesh the two well without having great cognitive dissonance. And so that's just kind of, that's my take. I cannot imagine saying I'm a Bible believing Christian and yet I'm a Democrat at the same time. It's just, it's kind of like saying, I'm a New York Yankees fan and a Boston Red Sox fan at the exact same time. I root for them both.
mm.
That's no. Either you're with the Yankees or you're with the Red Sox. That's just the way it is.
I mean, it's just, so scary at the moment that this is what's happened. I mean, there's so many, I know so many people, even in the UK, but in particular for the US elections, that on this issue alone, in terms of when it comes to gender, that was a big thing that got them to vote for President Trump and not be involved anymore with the Democratic Party. And to me, it just seems crazy that no one from the Democratic side had the common sense to just say this is absolutely absurd. What are we doing? Are they completely captured by the far left? Because we're talking about Mandami, we're talking about some the general policies. Is there any? We mentioned a bit of Gavin Newsom, but maybe aside from it, is there any other common sense that goes on within the Democratic Party at the moment?
Well, the Democratic Party, right now, just my opinion, it's kind of like dead in the water.
Right.
They're scrambling. There's no real leadership there. Obviously, Gavin Newsom is making that play right now. Gavin Newsom is trying to, stand out. He's being the moderate. He's being the centrist. But the Democratic Party's in shambles because uh, they're so divided among themselves. So not only are they divided from Republicans, their camp is entirely divided between the very radical left, the Mondamis of the world, and the more centrist Gavin Newsoms of the world. And so they're not a unified party, which in times past they've always been lockstep. They've always been together. And Trump has really dismantled the Democratic Party. He has just come in like a wrecking ball. And it's been interesting. So I I don't foresee in the near future. Obviously, if you study history, you understand there's always the pendulum swings. Right now,
Yeah.
the pendulum is on the far right, and so I don't see in the near future it going to the left. Now, eventually, more than likely, history tells us that that pendulum will go left at some point. But in the near future, I don't think we're there. I think the party's in such shambles, such division among it, and they don't relate to the normal everyday American. That's just kind of my takeaway. I am no political expert, but that's just my vantage point from looking at history and then kind of looking in the present.
I mean, yeah, I just from even from following Charlie Kirk's passing, the way even some of the Democratic people I've seen online address it has been really, in my opinion, really, really poor in terms of the way they've framed the passing. And I was really happy to see President Trump talk about that he's going to really go after a lot of these groups and some of the really have a much stronger, robust approach to it because you've had have had a president that was shot not long ago. You've had one of the most influential political speakers, commentators, whatever you want to call Charlie Kirk, one of the most influential people in America being shot. Something surely has to change in the US, and I think it's scary to see that's happening. I mean, UK is not much better in some ways. We have serious freedom of speech issues, which I think US is doing a lot better than. But that's another, I think, an interesting point where I wanted to get your take on is the freedom of speech element. Because one of the concerns or one of the things I've seen people say, we had somebody yesterday talk about this on our podcast about the worrying that now the right may try to censor freedom of speech. How do you where do you sit on all that?
Well, I sit with where Charlie Kirk said, and the freedom of speech gives you the right to be wrong. That's what freedom of speech is. And so what that means is you have the right to say what you want or what you believe, even if you're wrong. That if you can only speak if you're right, that's not freedom of speech. So freedom of speech gives you the right to be wrong. Do I like what they're saying? Not at all. I don't agree with it at all. I think there should be social consequences, such as, hey, I'm going to turn you into your employer and see if your employer likes your speech and let your employer decide that. I don't think it's something the government should be involved with. Obviously, if you are calling for violence, if you're calling for assassinations, if you're that's a different category. But if you're just saying, I can't stand Charlie Kirk, I think Charlie Kirk was, a racist, and I think Charlie Kirk was a you have the right to say that. You have the right to say that you're wrong, but you have the right to be wrong. And so I think that's a tight. I don't like it. Just I'm with Charlie Kirk on this. I just not a fan of it.
I agree, and I think one of the really, I think, sad things is not even being from sometimes just ordinary people, but it's the way the mainstream media also has framed Charlie Kirk as a person, and some of the things that they've been saying. You'd expect better from the so-called impartial journalists in terms of their coverage has been pretty shocking on even just the way they
Yeah,
address it. Even in the UK, some of the stuff, even off the bat, the way they call him a far right commentator and
yeah.
these established institutions that do that. And yeah, it really is concerning. Jackson, it's been amazing speaking to you. I'm conscious of time and stuff. We have a closing ritual I always do on the show, which is an unpopular opinion that you have that you think should be popular. So it can be anything we discussed, or it can be completely trivial. So anything unpopular opinion that you think should be popular.
I think maybe what I just said. I think freedom of speech is the right to be wrong, even if it's mean, even if it's cold. You have the right to be wrong, and that has to be protected. Like I said, that doesn't mean that you get to call for the assassination of Donald Trump or the assassination of Kamala Harris or whatever the case may be. But one of the foundational elements to the United States of America is you have the freedom to express yourself, and not everyone's right all the time. And so that would maybe be an unpopular take right now because I'm seeing some trends online saying you don't have the right to be wrong. And well, you do, or at least you should.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jackson. It's been amazing speaking to you.
Thanks for having me on, man. I love it.